What if a simple arranged marriage held a secret powerful enough to change two lives forever? What if the fight for an empire's inheritance came with an unexpected love and humiliations that would scar a humble woman for the rest of her life? This is the story of Emily and Ethan, a couple bound by a contract, only to discover that some destinies are written in tears, sacrifice, and revelations strong enough to shake generations. The Montgomery name carried weight across the entire city. Towers of glass and steel bore its mark. Fortunes were tied to its signature. And behind it all stood Richard Montgomery, a billionaire, a patriarch, a man who knew his empire was nearing its end. His health was failing, but his mind remained razor-sharp. And there was one thing he feared more than death itself, leaving his entire legacy in the hands of his only heir, his grandson, Ethan. Ethan Montgomery was everything Richard despised. Handsome, charming, but reckless to the core. He craved fast cars, wild nights, and fleeting romances far more than any sense of responsibility. To his grandfather, Ethan wasn't just careless. He was a storm waiting to wipe out everything the family had built. But fate always finds a way to intervene. One quiet afternoon, Richard noticed someone who didn't belong to his world of wealth and power. Her name was Emily Carter, a humble young woman with little to her name, except for her kindness. Yes, she was poor, but she carried something no amount of money could ever buy, a generous heart that gave without expecting anything in return. Richard saw her helping strangers on the street, offering food to a hungry child, even when she barely had enough for herself, and for the first time in years, he smiled. In Richard's mind, Emily was the answer. The cure to Ethan's arrogance, the only hope of saving the Montgomery legacy. But it wouldn't be love that bound them together. It would be a deal, a condition. The rule was set. If Ethan wanted to inherit the empire, he would have to marry Emily. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. For Emily, struggling to pay for her mother Margaret's cancer treatment, the proposal would feel like a lifeline she couldn't refuse. For Ethan, it would feel like a prison, until he realized that inside that cage, he might find something he never thought he'd know. True love. Ethan and Emily's wedding came without romance, without stolen glances or passion. Nothing more than the formality of a contract. To society, it looked strange, even unsettling. The heir to the city's greatest fortune marrying a poor woman, nobody with no name and no status. And soon enough, the whispers began to spread like wildfire. At the very first family dinner, Emily felt the weight of every stare. Women sized her up from head to toe, while a few of the men chuckled under their breath. One of Ethan's cousins, with a poisonous smile, leaned in just enough for everyone to hear and whispered, "She must have been bought. What else could she possibly have to offer?" Emily swallowed hard, holding her composure. Ethan, who until then had seemed indifferent, cut in with a cold edge to his voice. "That's enough." His steady gaze froze the table into silence. And for the first time, Emily realized he wasn't entirely against her. In the days that followed, her life became a constant test. Everywhere she went, she was treated like an outsider. At the market, whispers trailed behind her. On the street, stares of contempt followed her every step. Emily tried to ignore it, but at night she cried quietly, hidden away so he wouldn't see. But Ethan noticed. He noticed, and he couldn't understand why it bothered him so much. Still, relationship was marked by distance. They slept under the same roof, but not in the same heart. Yet there were moments when their eyes met differently. A quick touch as he held her hand in public. A silence that lingered too long after an argument. Anger tangled with something neither of them wanted to admit. Emily began to wonder if behind the cold exterior there was a man capable of love. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself wanting to protect her, though he couldn't explain why. What began as an arrangement was slowly turning into something far more dangerous. A bond strong enough to shake not only the two of them, but the entire Montgomery empire. Months passed, and between stolen glances and unspoken words, something began to grow between Ethan and Emily. The arranged marriage, once nothing more than a cold contract, started to warm in silences heavy with meaning. But everything changed on a gray morning when the phone rang with the news they both feared. Charles Montgomery was gone. At the funeral, the weight of grief mixed with the weight of expectation. It was time to open the will. Every eye in the room locked on Ethan, the natural heir. But when the lawyer began to read, the entire room held its breath. "I hereby declare that the inheritance of my entire empire does not belong solely to my grandson, Ethan Montgomery, but also to his wife, Emily." A murmur swept through the room. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. The grandfather had planned it all. He hadn't just wanted to secure the family's legacy, wanted to test his grandson's heart. And in that moment, the truth came to light. The lawyers revealed that Charles had known all along about Emily's humble background, and still, he had chosen her as the key piece. He believed that only someone who truly understood the pain of need could bring humanity to the empire he had built with so much sacrifice. The very people who once looked down on her fell silent, swallowing their pride. Emily, overwhelmed, felt the weight of every humiliation she had endured. And then, in front of everyone, Ethan took her hand. My grandfather was right. I didn't just inherit an empire. I inherited you. And now I realize that's the greatest legacy he could have ever left me. Emily wept in silence. But this time, not out of sorrow. She finally understood that even in the middle of lies and social conventions, a true love had been born. And that night, as she gazed out the mansion window, she thought about how fate had been both cruel and generous at the same time. After all, for love to bloom, a man had to die. The crowd whispered in the streets. Headlines exploded across the papers. But for Ethan and Emily, the only truth that mattered was the one that bound them. Cost of a love forged by fortune, but carved out through pain.